But, I woke up a little bit after that because there was this intense struggle and battle going on inside my tent. I couldn't see a battle, but I knew it was there, and I could feel it. And it was a battle like between good and evil. Now I think of it as a battle for a soul, something that happened at death.
The frenzy over just one soul. This is Touched by Heaven, everyday encounters with God. I'm your host, Trapper Jack. What we do is highlight those heavenly collisions. Collisions of heaven and earth happen all the time. Could include angels, miraculous healings, divine intervention, little things, just God saying hi, God shooting off the flare gun, saying hi, do you see me now? Do you see this? Do you see me here? Do you see me here? Could just be a quick hi, I love you. He gave me, he kind of gave me a hi a couple days ago. I was speaking locally here at St. Francis Xavier Church, and Jennifer out there, she said, we have church bells that go off in the quarter hour. You want us to turn those off? And I said, no, not on my account. Don't worry, I'll just talk through them. And then, God's timing is always perfect, right? So I was talking about God's language. What language does God speak in? He speaks in God speak. He speaks in the miraculous. I mean, if you go back to the Old Testament, talk to Moses. What language did God speak? Well, he spoke a darn good burning bush. I tell you right now. And then he spoke some parting of the Red Sea. And then he spoke some manna from heaven. That's the one that gets me. The manna from heaven. He threw food on them. He did. What was he saying? I love you. I'll take care of you. God speaks the miraculous because the miraculous wakes us up like nothing else. And often we're missing his language in our day-to-day life. Not everybody gets it. You've missed messages. Yes? He said it's 7:15. I don't know if you caught that. I speak God. So it was a wonderful time. Beth and I just had a wonderful time out there, and we had a little Q&A afterwards. One of the first questions, well, the title of the talk was Bringing Catholics Back to the Church, how my blindness brought me back to my faith. So someone stood up and said, well, you weren't always blind, were you? Happened a week ago Thursday. I don't know what the heck happened. I don't know, walked into a Walmart, suddenly there it is. I have something called retinitis pigmentosa. There's some other people here with it as well. It's a degenerative retinal disease. 7 kids in my family, 3 of us got it. I got it first as a teenager. I have an older sister who got it in her 30s and a younger sister who got it in her 20s. So 3 of us are walking. You ought to see us, when we all get together and we're going through stores together. It's like, what is wrong with those people? It's like this white cane brigade is coming along there. But I probably became legally blind probably in the 90s. I was finally tested, I think, in 2000. And by the way, if you're going to be blind, please be legally blind. There are people out there illegally blind. And I don't want you doing time over something like this. Just saying. Okay. You know what? It's a distraction. It's the beauty, if you will, of blindness. There's no pain. Unless you walk in front of a bus. There's no pain. Fellow blind people, right? There's no pain. Everybody has something. And whether it's a physical thing, a mental thing, a psychological thing, everyone's got something. Everyone's dealing with something. And everyone gets up every morning and faces that something. I think humans are just the most amazing creatures in the world. You are all carrying something. You're carrying whatever pain, whatever aggravations, whatever the stumbling blocks are. We're up against it, and every day we get up and he smiles at us. Look they're getting up again. They're going at it again. We really are. Whether it's physical or emotional or whatever. There's some people carrying some really heavy weights. So my feeling is that we all have something. And what do Catholics say when you have pain? What are Catholics supposed to do when you face a hardship? Offer it up. Offer it up. It's what we're doing. What do we do? What does it mean? Not sure. Somehow when I say offer it up, somebody somewhere goes, I feel great. Offer it up. And then doesn't it kill you though? Like afterwards, after you go through something, you go, I forgot to offer it up. Can I make this retroactive? And I swear you can. And if this podcast is a pain to you, offer it up. Just offer it up. Some new Pew Research out there. Interesting, because in the Pew Research, they asked the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, those are people who have no affiliation at all with any religion, now called the nuns, no affiliation, the 20s and early 30-somethings, and, and most of them former Christians, and basically, why aren't you a Christian anymore? What happened? Type thing. And according to Pew Research, the number one response was, I don't believe the teachings anymore. But that's not actually true. They gave them six answers, is what Pew did, which is odd for them. They're usually better at this. But they gave them 6 answers and then a 7th, none of the above. Well, none of the above won. So that to me just kind of negates everything they found out from the 6. So what the author of this article did is he went back to 2016 to look at that research where you could fill in the blank. What's the real reason people walk from the church? And bottom line is, I don't believe it. Believe what? All of it. I just don't believe it. The whole, everything. I just don't believe it. I went off to college. Here's some of the comments. I went off to college. I learned about evolution. So there you have it. I don't believe it. I don't believe any of this Christianity and God stuff. Another one said, there's no scientific proof that there was a God that created anything. So therefore, I don't believe it. They just don't believe it. Woke up this morning to how songs bubble up in my head, and you don't have to spiritualize the lyrics on this one. It was a song that was sung at Mass yesterday. It's called "Come to the Feast." In it, it's just talking about everything that's here. Come to the feast. We are fed here. There's plenty to drink. There's this abundance. It's a long song. It's just come to the feast because your thirst is quenched. Your hunger is fed. Come to the feast. There's so much here. This strikes me right now. It's a little bit like the world problem with food and water. There's plenty. It's just we have a distribution problem. We have a distribution problem in feeding the world and all that. Spiritually, we have a distribution problem. It's all the knowledge is here, but it's not getting to the people. It's certainly not getting to the 20s and 30-somethings. It's just not getting there. How much information is out there? There is so much abundance, but we have a distribution problem, which is why we do Touched by Heaven. I don't try to convince anybody of anything. We just tell stories here. We just tell stories. It's why I love the stories of Our Lady of Guadalupe or Eucharistic miracles, or if you take a look at the book, The Case for Christ, there's so much data in there that tells you about the early church and why there's just this overabundance of information out there that tells you why we believe what we believe. It's all out there, but once again, we have a distribution problem. But when you have again and again the scientific data, in the case of Eucharistic miracles, that this was a piece of bread, and something happened, and this has happened a number of times where something happens, and suddenly, when the lab looks at it, it's a piece of a human heart. And when they compare the different pieces that were bread that are now a human heart, and it comes from the same person, that's such a strong scientific piece of evidence, isn't it? But you have to know it. We have a distribution problem here, When I was speaking at St. Francis Xavier, I was talking about how in the early church, there was no doubt. There was no, I just don't believe it, because they were in it. They were in a church that heralded and talked about and read about and wrote about the miraculous healings and the angels and divine intervention. They were 100% in. I feel like I'm in the early church where there was just no doubt about anything. Everything was happening all around them. And they talked about it. It was in here. Everything was in here then. The church built on the miraculous. Everything was in here. Is there any doubt that they knew back then that the Eucharist was Jesus Christ? Any doubt they knew that was the real presence? Any doubt whatsoever? You don't risk your life over a symbol. You don't risk your life over a chunk of bread. They knew 100% that's Jesus Christ. Today, every year, Corpus Christi Sunday, right? And every year, the priest comes out and he begins talking about the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. Beautiful words, absolutely gorgeous. He goes 8 to 12 minutes talking about the beauty, the real presence of Jesus Christ, those beautiful words of which I remember none. Why do we celebrate Corpus Christi Sunday? Because in 1263, a German priest going through Italy was about 10 miles outside of Rome, and he's celebrating Mass. He was said to be a very good priest, but guess what? He doubted. He doubted the real presence. And then comes the time for the consecration. He holds the Eucharist up and he says, this is my body. And at that point, the Eucharist begins to bleed. It bleeds all over his hands. And he tries to hide it. He tries to hide. He's got blood all over and it's bleeding. And he tries to hide it. Then he stops. And then he just starts crying. He just starts crying. He can't go on. He gathers, and it's on the corporal, the cloth on the altar. It's dripping all over. It's blood everywhere. And he gathers everything up and he travels the 10 miles to go see the Pope. And he says, this is what happened. And a year after that, on that day, we began celebrating on an annual basis Corpus Christi Sunday. What could I say? What could anybody say that is more memorable, more powerful, that is a greater visualization in your mind right now than your picture in your mind of a priest with his hands covered in the blood of Jesus Christ? What could I say? What could anybody say? And may I guess that for most of us, it's the first time you've heard that story? Yes? I mean, how is it possible any of us don't know that story? Look how old we are. Just the odds you're going to hear that story. But when I heard it 2 weeks ago, I knew there was a miracle. I looked it up. I found it myself. And if the blood of Christ isn't enough, if that story isn't enough, then you do have those scientific Eucharistic miracles. Or I was talking again at St. Francis Xavier about other times when science, you cannot deny the science. God plus science equals the Lone Ranger. Ready? Anybody else love the Lone Ranger? Yo, yeah. No, when I was a kid, I was watching the reruns. I loved the Lone Ranger. It was always the same every week. Here comes the Lone Ranger and Tano. They ride into town. They do something heroic. They ride off. Then the one guy says, somebody in the town says, who was that masked man? Right? And the other guy says, which is frontier gibberish for, I don't know, but he left this silver bullet. Right? Okay. Oh, then it was back to the Lone Ranger, and Lone Ranger, hi-yo, silver, and away. They would ride off, right? And then they show Tonto, and Tonto's like, why am I even in this show? Okay, Christianity has a Lone Ranger story. The Lone Ranger story, it's actually the Lone Rangerette. Lone Rangerette comes riding into Mexico City in 1531, except she didn't have a horse. Okay, she's about 18 years old, beautiful, meets a guy by the name of Juan Diego. And she identifies herself as Our Lady of Guadalupe. What a Christian story for the silver bullet. So she says, here's what I want a chapel up here. I want a church up here on this hill. And she takes his tilma, his cloak, and puts roses in there. And the cloak it's cactus. It should dissolve in like 20, 30 years. Puts the roses in this cloak, wraps them up and says, okay, take them to the bishop and just show him the roses. Don't let anybody else see them. Okay. So he starts heading out. There goes Our Lady of Guadalupe. She said virtually nothing, but she left a silver bullet. He goes in to see the bishop, unfurls the cloak. There is the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe. The bishop drops to his knees. That image, which looks a lot like Our Lady of Revelation, chapter 12 of Revelation, there she is standing in front of the sun on top of the moon. That image converted 9 million Aztec pagans who did wonderful things like sacrifice their children to the gods. In a matter of a few years, total flip, they became Christian because of the imagery on here, that this woman, pregnant with God, a virgin from heaven, all the symbolism that just blew them away. Silver bullet, didn't have to say a thing. Advance 400 years, there's more in there. There's more in that silver bullet. 400 years later, now we've got science to look at this stuff, microscopes and all that kind of stuff. Let's take a look at this. Well, how is that tilma even still surviving? It looks just like it did 400 years ago. It hasn't deteriorated at all. That's miracle number one. Now let's take a look at this image. Feels like silk. Temperature of Our Lady of Guadalupe, 98.6. Interesting. And those stars, well, isn't that interesting? Those stars she's standing in front of in the image, in the exact position where the constellations were located on that day in 1531. And then they look into her eyes. They've written books about the eyes. They shined a light into her eyes, and her eyes constricted. Take the light away, dilate. They look in, just like the human eye, where the images are right side up and upside down. Same in her eyes. They're right side up and upside down. What are the images? You can see them microscopically. They had to wait 400 years to be able to see it. There's Juan Diego, there's the bishop, there's the cloak, there are the roses, and 12 other people in the room at the same time, in both eyes. That's science. And every time I hear someone talk about how science is disproving God, I'm going, why don't they talk about this? Make me Pope for a day, you know? They'll hear about it. This is science. Oh my gosh, there's just so much in there. So, is this a longer version? Is this the album version? We have a distribution problem. Mother Teresa, when she was over here from Calcutta, India, came to the U.S., was here for a while and said, you people are starving. My people aren't starving like you. And she was talking spiritually, of course. We have all the possessions in the world, but there's spiritually, where is it? And Mother Teresa just thought we were starving here. And I get that. Well, look at the nuns again, N-O-N-E-S, no affiliation, no anchor, own moral compass, out there with their minds open to anything and everything that might fall in and does. I mean, they're easy pickings because they're wandering the desert. They don't know they're in the desert. No anchor, and that's where evil can enter the picture. And there is a devil, unless Jesus was a liar or crazy. You got your options. He's either God, crazy, or a liar. Which one? When he said that the ruler of this world is the devil. This is his playground. I want to introduce you here to Lori Friedrich. She has just some really interesting stories to tell. One has to do with this frenzy over our souls, because sometimes just before we die, it's not determined yet. It's the battle isn't over yet, and there is a frenzy of good versus evil on this giant chessboard of life where we're getting these influences from the good guys and the bad guys. Sometimes it goes down to the wire. Here now is Lori Friedrich here on Touched by Heaven, Everyday Encounters with God. Are we in the right time zone?
We're in the right, yes, 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So that's good.
Should have verified that before I did this. Sometimes I remember, sometimes I forget, and all that kind of stuff. Well, thank you so much for this. I appreciate it very much.
No, I'm really excited to talk to you. I mean, like I told you in my email, I've been following you since Blind Faith Live, and that just really taught me a lot. And now you have this new great mission of Touched by Heaven, and what a great mission, I think, to awaken people to God's power and His presence and His love in our everyday lives. So I think people will really be inspired by this.
Oh, well, it sounds like you got a few things that have happened through the years. So
yeah.
Have you got your list in front of you?
I kind of. So when I was 19 years old, my father died. And it was my first year of college. And I was just about to head out to my first final. And my corded wall phone rang. And it was my mother. And she told me that they found out my father had cancer. And they were not going to be doing any surgery or any type of treatment. And that she wanted me to come home after the semester and spend the summer at home because she needed some help to take care of him. And so I told her, yeah, I'd come home. I said I was originally going to, after finals were over on Tuesday, my friends and I had planned to celebrate, and we were going to just, we were going to go camping. So there was mountains nearby. I was in Pennsylvania. But instead I said, I'll just come home. And she said, no, stay and enjoy yourself because it's going to be a long summer. And so that's what I did when we all finished our finals really early on Tuesday. And my friends and I headed out hiking and went to the mountains, and we were camping, and we built a fire. And it was very early, like 8 or 8:30. And we were just so tired because we had such an intense finals week that we just wanted to go to bed. And so we, went into our tents. It was like I said, 8 or 8:30. But, I woke up a little bit after that because there was this intense struggle and battle going on inside my tent. I couldn't see a battle, but I knew it was there and I could feel it. And it was a battle like between good and evil. So it was like good on one side of the tent and evil on the other side of the tent. And they were in the middle of this intense struggle. And it was really intense. I'd never felt anything that intense. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there. And it seemed to go on for a long time. And then suddenly it was like a burst that stopped, like a burst into silence and stillness. There was this great, just a complete stillness and silence and like a vastness. I could explain it like I think of like if you were in deep space and there was like a nothingness, like that's how still it was. And then in that stillness came like the face of Jesus, almost like you might picture on the shroud. It was not a real distinct face, but I knew that was like Jesus, but he was very peaceful and very contented and happy. And he just remained there. He didn't say anything, and he just was there. And it started to like disturb me or scare me a bit because I just never thought about seeing the face of Jesus, and I didn't know what was happening. And I remember thinking to myself, I wanted it to stop. And I know I shouldn't tell God to go away, but I was frightened, so I told him that. I know I shouldn't tell you to stop, but I want you to stop, and he did, and it went away. And it seemed like this whole thing lasted a long time, and I had a watch on, like one of those Indiglo watches you could light up to see the time. So I wanted to see what time it was, and it was 10:02, so it was 2 minutes after 10, and I went back to sleep, and the next morning my friends and I got up and we hiked for a little bit, and eventually we returned back to campus. And when I got back to the parking lot of my dorm, my aunt and uncle were in the parking lot, and they told me that my father had died and that we needed to pack up and get home. We went to the funeral and all that, and it was a couple weeks later. On our way out, I picked up the mail, and I was giving it to my mother, and the death certificate was in there. And I said, can I see that? Because I actually never knew what he died of. It was such a rush when I got back. And I opened up the death certificate, and I was reading it, and as I looked at it, the time of death was 10:02, on the exact time that I had that experience. My mind immediately clicked back to the tent and what had happened. It was exact time, exact day. And I didn't quite put it together. I didn't know what had happened. Like, now I think of it as a battle for a soul, something that happened at death. I told someone once about it, and they're like, well, what did your father do? And I don't know. I don't think he did anything terrible. I think it was just a battle for the soul. But maybe you have some insight into that.
Well,
I don't know.
What I think it's interesting. I think that's very interesting because when you speak of feeling a battle in the tent, describe that. Is it in your head? Is it in the tent? Are you a spectator?
No, I'm a spectator, and I felt like it was actually in the tent. Like one side was good, one side was evil, and they were like swirling around and clashing. Like I didn't see anything, but I felt like you would almost see swords and a huge battle. It was like a battlefield.
You really felt that. What did that mean to you then? Obviously, later on, you kind of piece this together. But at the time, did you think it was over you? Did you think that they just happened to be battling near you? What did you think it was?
I had no idea. I didn't think it was anything over me. I thought I was a spectator. I was not involved in the battle, and I didn't know what it was. I just felt like it was intensely a good evil thing, and I didn't have any insight really to why it was happening.
It's interesting. I'll tell you where my mind goes is that Kathy Namey, Dr. Namey's wife, many years ago when she was starting to experience many more things on that spiritual level, a gentleman was about to pass away, and of course, a lot of times people want Kathy to be there or the doctor or whatever, to pray and whatnot. But she was there, and this was early on in these experiences, and she saw it. I don't know why there was still a question about where this soul was going, but there apparently was still a question about what was coming next because she saw it. She saw, however she saw the good angels and the bad angels, she saw the flurry of activity. She saw it. She saw that It was, as you described it, it was just this. I use the word frenzy. Maybe she used that word too.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would think when you said flurry or frenzy. That's exactly what it was.
There was this frenzy going on over this soul. It was This is interesting because when you think, we think that when someone dies, it's probably pretty clear cut. But in this case, and obviously for your father as well, there is some question. There's still some question going on of where she is going to go. But she saw this and felt this frenzy over the soul of this gentleman, and she realized that this is where you really try to get that perspective of how much they hate us, how much the evil hates us. Because I go back again, you have to ask yourself, if evil hates us, why? Why? What did we ever do to them? And what we're doing to them is every time we follow Christ, we're taking some power out of them. We are, when Jesus, did you see the movie The Passion of the Christ by chance?
Yeah. Yes, I did.
There was something Mel Gibson got right. I don't know how he got it right, but he got it right. There's that scene where, that evil character, kind of that devilish character that's kind of walking along and, he's kind of around Jesus and he's just dripping hate. He just hates. It's kind of like this, I'm trying to remember how this guy looked. I could see better back then, but it was kind of this bony, whitish, shiny. But it was Satan. For all intents and purposes, it was Satan. And he just hated Jesus and he wanted that man dead. He was dripping with hate for this, whoever this Jesus guy was. And so it comes time for the crucifixion in the movie, and Christ dies. And at the moment of death, you see this teardrop fall out of heaven, basically. The symbolism is the Father is shedding a tear. But he's also, his Son has fulfilled what he came to do. He came to die for us. Then this evil character, who should be jumping for joy that this Jesus guy is dead, should be jumping for joy. He looks up with the meanest scowl on his face, just angry into the face of God, and lets out this howl. And Dr. Naomi and I talked about how Mel Gibson got it right in that's when the devil found out who Jesus really was, and he felt it. He felt himself being neutralized. He felt in his own being he now had less power than he had before. There's no other reason for that yell. There's no other reason for that scowl and yell and anger. He lost something. He just lost some influence in this world. So every time one of us picks up our cross and follows Christ and dies a believer, they lose a little more power, a little more. And Dr. Naomi always talked about the matching this way. Eventually, enough of us have followed Christ that we have completely neutralized evil in this world. And there's a Harvard psychology professor, the head of, I don't know if he's still there or not, but he used to go out and give talks. He was the foremost authority on historical violence in the world. And he said, and they tracked violence and death. And he says, I don't know what's going on right now. He says, I know it doesn't seem like it because we get those notifications of all the horrible things going on in the world. But he said, right now in the world is the most peaceful time the world has ever known. And he says, I don't know what we're doing right, but we're doing something right. This is what we're doing right. We are slowly but surely taking the evil out of the world. And that frenzy of activity for that soul is a beautiful example of how important each and every soul is, because each one that's on the good side takes a little more of that influence of the negative out of this world. What you felt is exactly what Kathy described and what Dr. Naomi and I talked about in terms of the matching. Each one of us is so important. Each one of us is so vital to finally driving the evil out of this world. Piece by piece, I think it's fascinating. I think it just proves the point of the matching. I do. Yeah,
it all makes sense, and then it gives you a lot more purpose for your life and turning to God and turning to good, because it's so important, right? You can see the importance there.
Yeah, it is our purpose. Each one of us has to figure this out, that our number one purpose of being on this earth is to take the evil out of the world. He neutralized Lucifer, and we're one by one neutralizing those fallen angels until our number equals their number. And I know Dr. Namey is the only person that I know of ever to quite say it that way, but I'm totally on board with it. We're watching it. You're explaining it. I think it's dead on. I think it's absolutely dead on. So, and let's not miss that you saw the face of Jesus after all was said and done. There was that peace that you felt, and then the face of Jesus. So, the outcome appears to be that the good guys won. All right, what's next on your hit list?
So my hit list. So I finished up college, and along the way I realized, I grew up Catholic, and I realized that I didn't have to go to Mass when I was away, and it wasn't intentional. I just eventually stopped going. I finished up school, and then I was accepted into graduate school in Tampa, Florida, and moved there, and I was going to school there, and one night, some friends and I went out to dinner, and we were coming home on one of the main roads, and it was completely dark out, and I was in the passenger seat, and I was looking out the window, and there was a Catholic church, and it was like lit up with kind of like floodlights, like coming from the ground stuff. It was so beautiful. I was just struck by the beauty, and all of a sudden, my heart was gripped by like a sadness and a longing. I knew I was missing something, and I knew it was connected to going and returning to church. Right? I knew I was really missing something, something valuable. And so I made up my mind right then to go, that I would return to church. So I finished up graduate school, and I returned to church, and I started getting involved in, someone had asked me to be a sponsor for RCIA. So I did that, and it was a great experience. I mean, it brought me into a lot of things that, even though I'd went to Catholic schools, that I really didn't know about the faith. One was like, I had no idea how to pray the rosary. And someone introduced me and gave me a pamphlet on the rosary. I'd pray it. One night I fell asleep, and it was on my chest. And I woke up in the middle of the night, and it was like a burning warm sensation exactly where the rosary was. And all of a sudden, I just knew that Mary was with me. This whole time, Mary's going to be with me, and she was guiding me. And I was really inspired by the Medjugorje. And Medjugorje is a city in Bosnia, and it's a Marian apparition site. And Mary was appearing to young people, like about my age, a little younger. And I was just so inspired by that there was something like powerful going in the world now. So that really inspired me to pray the rosary. Another thing someone asked me to do was they had perpetual adoration. And adoration is where we adore Jesus in the Eucharist. It's displayed, and you go in and you can pray or sit there. And I knew when I was in there, I didn't even know about the Catholic teaching that Jesus was truly present in the Eucharist. Somehow along the line, I missed that. But I knew when I went in there was something special. It was just very peaceful and kind of a special time. And so I started going like after Mass too. And also, like I said, just a real closeness in the chapel during adoration. From there, just God started giving me like signs of things, like his presence in my life. For instance, I was in a bookstore, and I was looking for a journal, and one caught my eye. On the front of this journal was Jeremiah 29:11, and I wrote it down so I would, I don't have it memorized. So here's how it goes. It says, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. When you call me, when you go to me to pray to me, I will listen to you. When you look for me, you will find me. Yes, when you seek me with all your heart, you will find me, says the Lord, and I will change your lot. There was everything. Everything that I had asked for right there was contained in that. I couldn't believe his graciousness.
Well, if you've listened to all these episodes, then that sounds kind of familiar to you too, then.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Episode 1. Do you remember episode 1 here? Because I had... There
was a woman.
No, not a woman. It was Dave Jackson, but it was... I had asked Suri, what's today's Bible verse? And it gave me Proverbs.
Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and he will establish your plans.
And then Dave gave me his. They sound like the same verse. They went right into it because it was all about plans and how he'll help you prosper and all that.
For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future.
So
Right.
it was like, do it in the name of Jesus, and I'm going to work with you, kind of type stuff. So yeah, I'm familiar with that. It's a very hopeful Bible verse. That's a very hopeful Bible verse. Yeah.
One thing he first taught me was to be a giver. I know how important it is to him because it was the first real lesson, and I was not a giver. So I just felt impressed that he wanted me to start giving to my parish, my church, $50 a week, which sounded like he may as well just ask me to jump off a cliff because I was in debt. And but I was determined to live like a radical life for God. So if I was going to err on the side of being ridiculous, I was going to do it. I was just going to step out and do it. So I went and got envelopes from the church. I wrote my first check and I put it in the collection. And really, it was just such joy and freedom when I did that. He just gave me such a freedom. And I think by doing that, he broke a power of greed over me. I didn't worry about money then. I became a giver. Like if there was a homeless person, if there was a box to donate to something, I was going to give. I was going to give wherever it was needed. And it was not only money he was teaching me to give, but like of myself. I had to be available to people.
Did you notice that when you started giving, you started getting more blessings?
Yes. Things happen. Oh, you got to love this one. Okay. If you don't believe in miracles, you might hit this. The IRS sent a letter to me. They said that they had found a deduction that I could have taken, but that I didn't, and they were depositing $900 in my bank account.
That's the greatest miracle I've ever heard.
Yeah.
The IRS tells you that you didn't claim something. Oh my gosh, I didn't know they did that.
I didn't know they did it either. I thought it was a joke. No, and they even called me. This is the truth. They called me and told me how to do it the next year so I didn't miss it.
This was all in that first year where you started giving.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
That's a great lesson. That's a great lesson.
Yeah.
You don't do it to get the back, but it just tells you, as you said, I think you unlock something.
Yes.
You went to generosity and it comes back. Yeah. Thank you, Lori Friedrich, with what may be the greatest miracle of all time. The IRS calling to say, let's see if we can save you some money. What? That's new. Takeaways today, IRS are just a bunch of great guys and gals. They are. And also pray for those who are out there not connected to anything, who don't have an anchor, who are wandering the desert. Pray for them that they find their way back to what we know, this overabundance, inviting them to the feast. All this knowledge is here, but we have a distribution problem. Help them find out. Share these episodes. Share Touched by Heaven, Everyday Encounters with God. Share that with them. And while you're still here, make sure you go into your app and rate and review. It helps other people find us here so they too can receive this overabundance of information of everything God is doing, these wonderful collisions of heaven and earth that occur all the time. Thank you so much for listening to Touched by Heaven, Everyday Encounters with God. I'll see you next time. I'm Trapper Jack.